Okay. All right. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Lori Setliff, and I'm one of the team members here at Ascendle. And I have the pleasure of moderating today's webinar about increasing your team's speed, predictability, and quality around software development. So a little bit about Ascendle, if you don't know us, we are a firm that specializes in custom software delivery. We also have a very strong passion for helping your teams do that well and happy and jointed and cohesive. We specialize in things such as web development, app development, platform development, product strategy, and product design. Just a brief agenda so you know what you're getting into today. We're going to do some introductions, talk about the current state, the common symptoms that you're facing as business leaders, root causes of those symptoms, how we approach solving them, and how we approach getting your team on board to fixing those systemically and creating better, healthier teams. Okay, so without further ado, this is today's panel. We have Susanna Parnan-Mitchell, who is our delivery lead and product strategist here at Ascendle. She's been here for several years and is everyone's favorite one-on-one partner. Susanna is great to talk to and think through any problem you might be facing. Second, we have Tom Schwendler. He's our product lead and the most interesting man any of us have ever met. So I'm going to talk to him about product or salmon fishing. Tom is your guy. And finally, we have Patrick Witt, one of our Scrum masters here at Ascendle. He is the Swiss Army knife of Scrum. Wherever you need him, he can be there. He just has a great passion for supporting our teams and making sure everyone, client and developers, are happy. Okay, so diving right in, our goal today is to talk to you about driving to done and helping you build great software and great teams at the same time. So to kick things off, I'm going to initiate a poll for us to do. So this is multiple select, so feel free to answer with as many answers that are relevant to you and your organization. That question is, what challenges are your organization currently facing? Give you guys 30 more seconds to finish answering that. Okay. 5 more seconds for any last second voters that want to get in here. So 3, 2, 1. Awesome. Here are the results of that. There we go. We had a feeling that unpredictable and late delivery might be the most common answer. So as we walk through today, this is going to be one of the root issues that we're looking to solve. And I'm going to pass it off to Susanna to talk about that.
Hi, everyone. As Lori said, seeing the poll results, it's obvious that some or most of you are feeling pain in almost all of these areas, or maybe a couple of them. We were a little sneaky with our poll questions because they're actually synonymous to the most common symptoms we see across the board when it comes to effectiveness of development teams within the clients that we work with. So kind of knew that these would be the most challenging areas. So in a bit more detail, I'm just going to kind of go through what we see as common symptoms here. Let me close this poll out. Unpredictable timeline is one of the things we see a lot. It's hard to predict when the product's going to be ready to go to market. You might be struggling with when to tell your customers or even your internal team members when the development is actually going to be complete. And it could be for a variety of reasons, and maybe your team doesn't even know. Next, development speed. Might seem like your teams are working really, really hard. You're just not seeing the progress on actual feature completion. Nothing's like done. It just keeps going. Next would be team stability. There's a lot of churn in the workforce right now. Retention is low. And as all of you know, there's a very real cost to upskilling new hires. So it's a big issue. And then last, but certainly not least, something we see a lot as well, and saw a lot of you choose on this poll, the quality can be low. So you're shipping a buggy product, because of that, you're eroding your brand, your trust within your customer base, and it, sucks up valuable development time that you could spend on new features when you're fixing bugs. So, as Laurie mentioned, we're going to kind of focus today on all of these a little bit and really talk more, instead of about solving any particular problem here, about the change management that's required to improve this stuff across the board. How do you practically implement the foundational changes that you need to see a ripple effect on your speed, your quality, your team health, and your predictability? So before I get into that, I'm going to talk a little bit more deeply about the root causes of unpredictability, the one that was not only just most chosen in the poll, but the one we see probably the most within our clients, and the one that kind of trickles into all the other problems. Digging a bit more into unpredictability, it's really hard when you struggle with not knowing when it'll be done. Perhaps some of you are finding out when it's done, once the team's actually finished. There's just no forward insight. And we're just going to go through 6 issues that we think can really make or break your team's ability to deliver effectively and, more importantly, predictably. So those are, in no real particular order: resources or people issues. You don't have the right roles and responsibilities defined. Perhaps you don't have enough people, but in general, we see this as a true root cause of unpredictability. Next is requirements, or in this case, I'd rather say like work definition and vision. So this looks like people not knowing what they're supposed to do, and just as importantly, why they're doing it. Next is ruthless prioritization, or just prioritization in general. This looks like having too many different efforts in progress at the same time. You haven't prioritized enough, and you're trying to tackle too much at once, losing kind of focus and the ability to deliver any one thing. Next is refinement. Your team's working on stuff that's maybe too big. It really needs to be broken down into more quickly deliverable incremental pieces. Another big root cause that we see for unpredictability. And then last but not least is retrospective, which I don't know if it's, there we go. And this is a key one in terms of the change management we're going to be getting into, because it's such a critical component to have honest self and team inspection and improvement on an ongoing basis. So are your team members even empowered enough to conduct true continuous improvement? So I had the easy part here, telling you what you already know, that there are problems in the organization. A little bit more about why unpredictability seems to pop up as a major cause. And so I'm going to hand it off to Tom, who's going to get into the meat about what we suggest to actually address these issues and how you can do it within a unique construct of your own organizations.
Thanks, Susanna. Hey, everybody. So what I'm going to talk about today may apply to your company or it may not, but what we find for many companies, a big reason for unpredictability is the overall approach that they use for their software development. So let's explore that a little bit. If this diagram defines the scope of a project along its width and the completeness along its height, the traditional approach is to do a small amount of work across the entire project at a time. So as progress is made, it's made across the entire scope of the project. Progress is continued across that entire scope until the project is done. So if we take a look at the timeline of a traditional project, going to the next slide, we define the start and ship date. So the start's when we're going to begin and ships when we want it to go out to our customers. There is going to be a point where the application becomes usable. Typically, that's the time where most of the coding is finished and the QA process starts. That time from the start of the project to the point where it's usable is what we refer to as the zone of unknowns. It's during this time, you might have the following questions. Are we building the right product? Are there any bugs we don't know about yet? And most importantly, how long is it going to take until we're going to be done? The thing is, we don't have any of those answers to those questions. In other words, there's no predictability for this project. So let's take a look at how this could work using an iterative agile approach. Using the same diagram to visualize the project, instead of working on a little bit of everything, we complete everything for a little part of the application, a vertical slice. Over time, we complete everything of more slices and build out our application by adding the slices together. So how does this look in the project timeline? Setting up the same start and ship dates, we start completing usable increments on a regular basis. Could be every 2 weeks. Over time, we continue to build out these usable increments. The critical thing here is that our zone of unknowns is much shorter because we very quickly, we have something we can use. Even if it's only a small slice, because we have something, we can validate that we're building the right product, that it's bug-free, and because we know how long it took to build that slice, we can predict and, more importantly, control when the project will be done. The business has the power to control the project schedule. So if we don't like when it's going to ship, we find out, you know what we've completed so far is actually something we could ship to our customers. We can move that ship date to when we want. This is the power of working in an agile way. So this might be something you already know about. I'm not teaching anything new. What I want to get into here is say, okay, this is something I would like to do as a company. So moving on, adding predictability is important, right? And you want to make that agile transformation for your company. Once your company has decided to take the plunge and move to agile, for example, your next question might be how to roll it out. It's a big change going from waterfall to agile and for software development. Typically, some form of training is done to educate the organization on the new approach. Normally, this is done in classroom-style training. I'm sure many of you have gone through this process. An expert in the field comes into your business and has a series of training sessions to teach your people how to operate in this new way. We've done that as well at Ascendle. We have found that this type of teaching is important, but it's not effective by itself. What we found is that classroom training is great for teaching concepts, but not for teaching actions. We've also tried embedding process experts to model the new processes. People learn how to work new ways by watching the expert model it. What we found with modeling is that people practice those new processes while the mentor is included, but after the mentor leaves, people go back to their old ways. The bottom line is that these traditional approaches to training just don't stick. We need to go beyond classroom training to have real project involvement training. So to move it forward here, what we have found is we found four key ways to successful training. The main thing is to have a way to learn by doing. There can be some classroom training that still needs to happen to learn the concepts, but actual doing to have them stick. We found that there are four keys to success. First is create the pilot team. Pick the right people to learn the new process, people who want to learn. You could and should include skeptics as long as they're able or willing to learn. Second, define and prioritize. The pilot team should have a well-defined segment of work to execute on. And the team should understand why that work is important to the business. Thirdly, form and storm. Learning a new process is difficult. Make sure you understand that the team is going to slow down while they're learning, and they should be given the space to go through that process. Finally, perform and grow. And here's the key part. Once that pilot team is stable, you can now cycle in others from your organization to be part of that team and learn the new process by being part of it and doing. Once those people learn the new process and more importantly, why it works, they become advocates for its use throughout the rest of your organization. So we're going to explore each of these keys in more detail. We'll start with Susanna. I'm going to give you back the mic, and you're going to start talking about the key number one, the pilot team.
Okay, so we're going to dig in a bit on success factor one here, forming a pilot team. But before I get into that, I just want to introduce or maybe remind you all of a model that we commonly use to explain and plan for organizational change. It's the forming, storming, norming, performing model, which you've already heard mentioned a little bit, and you see here on this slide. This model of group development, team development was first proposed by Bruce Tuckman in 1965, who said these phases are all necessarily, frankly, inevitable in order for a team to grow, mature, tackle problems, find solutions, plan work, and ultimately deliver results. So it's just kind of a natural progression when you're making these changes and transitions in the organization. So you'll see us reference this a few times. You don't need to be super familiar with the background of the model. Just kind of soak it in and note that when the team formation and changes are happening, there's just a natural dip in productivity. That's kind of the key takeaway for the model itself. So back to the key success area here is creating a pilot team. So before I get into that, there are two primary approaches to rolling out organizational change or agile transformation within the organization. One is the pilot team approach, essentially starting with one team to get it right for the organization before you roll out everywhere else. And another one we call Big Bang, which is just having all your team start at once with a new process and just sort of everybody figure it out together. To be clear, both can work. We've seen it, we've done it, but we personally think that the Big Bang approach is a little too risky and typically recommend the pilot team approach. It's important to remember that while you're going through this change, there are a couple of things going on simultaneously as you're moving to Agile. Scrum team members are learning the fundamentals of Scrum. The company is learning what it means to be Agile and what the communication flow is going to be. And then everybody's figuring out how to best adapt it to your own company's ecosystem. So again, we recommend the pilot team because ultimately it means that less people are in that valley of the dip at one time, which reduces risk for the organization and keeps productivity a little bit more steady. Basically, everything doesn't come to a grinding halt while people figure out where they are. It keeps it within one team as that team figures out how to do it. So on a practical note, how do you actually form a pilot team? There are some key roles, I think, ready for next slide.
Real quick, we're gonna.
We wanted to. That's right. We want to ask you guys about your experience first.
Yes. Yeah. So really quick, another poll for you guys to answer. I promise this is the last one. Just what is your experience with Scrum teams up until this point? So you have Scrum teams and it's working well. You have a modified Scrum team, meaning you have no Scrum masters or your product person is shared across multiple teams. Are you just getting started with this? Have you tried it in the past and it failed? Or are you brand new to Scrum and you're not sure what we're talking about? So I'll give you guys 30 more seconds to answer that. Okay, 10 more seconds. On. There's actually a really good mix in this, which is great. We also have the Q&A feature enabled. So if you have questions as we're going through, feel free to drop in more questions and upvote questions others have asked, and we will come back to those at the end. Okay, so I'm gonna end the poll. We have a good mix, but predominantly everyone here is working with Scrum teams and it's working well. We do have a couple of people on the call that are either just getting started or are unfamiliar with Scrum.
Okay, so let's start then with what a pilot Scrum team might look like. Because we have a couple of people, I'll talk about it a little bit, but maybe another panelist can answer more generally what a Scrum team is in the Q&A while I do this. But essentially, we're going to have some key roles included in our pilot Scrum team. And then as Tom alluded to earlier, some particular types of attitudes you might look for because it is the pilot team. So the first role we want to touch on is the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master, as those of you who are familiar with Scrum know, is that person who's sort of in charge of process within the team. They're super critical for change management and monitoring team health, team happiness, team effectiveness, and making sure that the processes are generally being followed. Next, we have a PO. This is the person who's in charge of what gets built. And this team member is super critical for prioritization, which is the next key to success we'll cover. But super important to have these two roles, independent, separate roles on your team. And then lastly, but not leastly, as they're the kind of engine of your organization here, is the development team. So you can see underneath a T-shaped group of individuals, meaning this group can independently deliver functionality, and they have sort of both wide and deep knowledge on the team. This includes, you see it's only 3 roles here, so you might have different titles in your organization. The developers here include your folks actually slinging code, as well as maybe a tech lead or architect if you're using that terminology, your QA engineer. All of those folks are grouped into your development team. And in general, you want to have all of these roles filled on your pilot team. And for your pilot team, Tom mentioned this quickly, you really want to have people with a mindset that's open to change and are kind of enthusiastic and ready to do the hard work of inspection and adaptation and try new things. So you want most, but not necessarily all of your team members to come in with that mindset. Tom said it would be good to include a skeptic. I'll underscore that here. Specifically on the engineering side, you don't want your Scrum Master or PO to be a skeptic because that can mess up process. But on the engineering side, it can be good to include a skeptic kind of as a strategic move. This is because once that skeptic is won over to the new way of working, they can be a very powerful change agent within your organization. So on a practical note, that's who we suggest creating your pilot team. Next, we'll get into the second key to success, ruthless prioritization. So in a nutshell, priority matters. We're not going to really go into how to prioritize in this webinar. There's several techniques. We do actually have a prior webinar that we've given on that topic. So, reach out if you're interested in that content or cruise our website. But instead, we're going to talk about why it's so critically important to prioritize. So I'm going to share 6 key reasons for why that is, though there are many, many more. First is most important things. So always working on the most important thing. It really reduces waste within the organization and ensures that your teams are you're always investing time into what you think is most important. By doing this, you actually accelerate risk as well. You find out really early if you're working on the wrong thing or if something's not working. Next is you get to test drive longer, which is you don't have to wait until everything is complete. If you're prioritizing and having things ready to ship each sprint, you actually can spend more time testing it with your real user base. Next is focus or deliberate attention. When there's too much in play, your teams will lose focus. Not necessarily mentioned on this slide, but an important concept here to mention as well is this concept of limiting work in progress. So you're prioritizing not just at the team level, where you don't have too much going on at once, but you're also prioritizing at the backlog level to make sure you're not giving your teams too big of a spread of work to work on here. That you're reducing any kind of time spent context switching, spreading focus too thin. You'll just find it's more effective when you prioritize ruthlessly. Next is you don't have time. So because you've prioritized by business value, there's never enough time to build the product you want. If we had enough time to build the products we want, nothing would ever get to market. So you don't have enough time to do it all, never. There's always a wish list that will be continuing. But because you've prioritized, anything you don't get to, it matters less. And then lastly, you can ship anytime you want. You can ship as early as you want. And this is important. This is important to note because just like with kind of going to market, when you get to go to market faster, you actually get to your ROI faster. And what it does is it gives the business true flexibility as to when to ship. So you can look at, as Tom was saying in an earlier slide, look at everything that's been done and make the call at any time. And you can do that because you've built the most important things first, and it might be enough. So it really unlocks like a true MVP approach. Also, one more thing I want to add before we move on. Priority matters as well because you build in this concept of small wins. It's not listed here, but I want to touch on it. It's a really valuable tool in terms of keeping your teams happy and healthy. Having sort of iterative small wins for your team, it's not just good for your business. Your team is happy when they're able to set a goal, crush it, and actually deliver something instead of kind of going week by week by week by week and nothing is fully done. So not mentioned here, but really a key piece to tie back to our earlier kind of core issues is your team is happier when they can ship. So that's it for priority. I'm gonna give it off to Patrick here so he can have a turn on the mic and talk us through the hardest part, which is forming and storming.
Thank you, Susanna. And Susanna touched on this model earlier, this forming, storming, norming, and performing model. But I'd really like to reiterate how critical this is to success. This model really empowers your team. It allows them to better problem solve, better plan their work, and better grow as a team. And most importantly, it allows them to deliver business results, which is what this is all about. So in this forming phase, your team is, to no surprise, just getting started. They're forming. Team members are usually excited to be a part of the team, and they're eager about the work ahead of them. Oftentimes, they have really high positive expectations for the team experience. And at the same time, they also might be having some feelings of anxiety, some doubt, wondering if they're going to fit in with the team or if their performance is going to measure up and be on par with their other teammates. So while spirits are usually high in this phase, you really should not expect immediate results. In fact, you should actually expect your team to underperform in this early forming phase. Not only is the team new and still getting familiar with their with their work styles and their skill sets, but they're also doing something completely different. They've never used this process before, and it takes a lot to really hone your skills and become an expert at it. So you really shouldn't expect the team to grasp it right away. And the work's going to be a little bit more difficult at first because they are using this new process. But this forming phase is vital to the team cohesion. This is where the team is really going to have to start to learn, and it's where communication becomes critical to the success of the team. the more comfortable your team is with one another, and the more psychological safety that they feel within the team, the more they can communicate, the more they can share, and the better that they'll perform as the development continues. And this communication really starts to come out during the storming stage, which is the second one. Here you start to see members start to respond to differences with one another, and you start to see how they deal with conflict internally. And while the team has become more comfortable with each other and they're really starting to gel, that comfortability allows them to have these deep, honest conversations that could help drive change. It's not uncommon to see the focus drift from the actual work at hand to more of frustration with the team's performance and the progress they've made because they're doing this in an entirely new way. So in order to combat this, it's really important to have leadership support. And the first thing that first of all, if you're going to implement organizational change, everyone needs to be bought into it, everyone from the top down. It cannot be successful without everyone buying into it. So the first important thing to do is to suspend disbelief. And this is going to come, I'm sorry about that, I misspoke. Suspend disbelief, this is going to come because it's going to be messy. It's a new process, they're new to it, they're going to come into a lot of obstacles. You're going to have your team likely be very stressed out, and they might not immediately understand how this is all going to work, and they're going to be impatient, and they might want to go back to their old ways. Others might be complaining to their managers that this isn't worth it, and this likely isn't going to work. And they're going to point out that they're not getting anything done. And at least with their old way, their traditional way of doing work, they'd be making some progress. And it's really important here that the support from the top down is evident. Employees need to be heard, and they need to be given encouragement from optimistic higher ups that I know this will work, or let's just give this a little bit more time, or I know that this is hard, please stick with it. So if everyone's bought in and everyone's trying to make each other better and progress, that's really where you're going to see success in this. And to tie this back in with the storming phase, this storming phase is crucial because this is where the team gets frustrated. This is sort of the turning point where things are going bad and you need to get it going. You need things to start going well. And part of this and how to fix this is you need to have open and honest discussions. And as Tom alluded to in previous slides, this is an iterative and an incremental approach. And each iteration, you want to learn from your mistakes and become better and figure out ways to mitigate all the mistakes that happen so you can have a more successful sprint coming up. I know we have some people that are new to Scrum, so I'm going to backtrack a little bit. The sprint retrospective is a Scrum event that happens at the end of each sprint. You can't have a complete sprint without it. It's a required event. And it's such a vitally important event because it's just the team. There are no stakeholders involved. You could have this open, honest discussion. What's bothering the team? What needs to change? What do we need to do differently? And how are we going to adapt to have more success going forward? And while it is a great opportunity and it's encouraged to talk about what went well, the real meat and potatoes is what didn't go well and how can we change to make sure that this doesn't happen coming up. So it's important to leverage these retrospectives to have these truthful discussions, and having these and coming up with action items, something that you can actually take away and implement into your next round of development. That's going to really drive this change and get you out of the storming phase and push you more into this norming phase where the team starts to become more familiar with the systems and the team, and then they can start to prosper and excel in their performance. It's important for your team to be transparent, your team to really look into what's going on, and then your team to adapt to these changes to determine what's actually going to be best for your team to drive success. And I started to touch on the performing and growing, but I'm going to pass this off to Susanna to take that over.
All right, last mic pass. Here we go. So we're going to go through real quick this last key to success. This is really what brings it all together, performing and then growing, what you've learned in your small pilot team that did all of that storming into the rest of the organization. So when we say norming, what we mean is like things are starting to reach a steady state. Teams are effective, the work is becoming more predictable. You're no longer seeing the slowdowns of the figure it out phase. I want to note, though, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to stop any of what you were doing during that storming phase. Like, you're still going to do the retrospectives. You still want to do that thoughtful inspection. At this point, it just becomes part of the normal Scrum cycle. So with that, here's where you can actually begin to start cycling in other team members. Instead of the big bang that we talked about before, you get it right, and then now you start to disseminate it. And we suggest having new team members come in every few sprints to really start soaking it in. The advantage to this is you really have kind of all of the team members are now at this point ready to teach versus everybody being in a learning state. From a practical perspective, you can rotate every couple of sprints, maybe faster if the changes are really small. I saw on the poll that lots of people are already practicing and maybe just need a little bit of adjustment, or so that might be 2 sprints or so, or a little bit slower if it's a more complex project. If your teams aren't like really familiar with Scrum and are having to truly start at the fundamentals, maybe that looks more like 3 or 4 sprints. But the idea here is you have your effective team and you can rotate folks out, do a little bit of that mentoring that Tom and modeling that Tom was talking about, some crossover, and then start spreading it to other teams within your organization once you kind of meet that sort of critical mass of knowledge passing. So we wanted to end off really quickly before kind of showing you all the benefits with just some things to keep in mind. Patrick touched a little bit on this, but it's important for this performing and growing phase as well. Key to just keep in mind, like new team members that are being cycled in, they're still learning the process. So not everybody's at the same spot. It's really important to kind of meet people where they're at during this, like some people being established and some people being new phase. Also, it's worth noting, as you cycle more people in, it's gonna start creating more organization-wide impact. Everybody will start feeling it. So there might be some churn, but certainly that'll skew towards benefit once everybody ends up being on that same path. Also important to note that everybody's always learning. It's a key part of this. So because you're continuing to adapt and iterate as well as add in new folks, like we're not stopping that practice. It just needs to be a constant state of learning and an attitude for that that's maintained. And then last, there's always challenges. Each organization is unique. Rollout looks different. I don't know that we've ever at Ascendle done an agile transformation rollout where there weren't things to figure out. So it's more about embedding that attitude of we can fix it. Let's work together. Let's adapt. Let's fix to address those challenges. And some of that comes from really getting the right pilot team members that can be those champions for change. And then if you do those sort of 4 things that we recommend, we really think that there'll be some sort of true key success results. Our product training approach, what we call actually the velocity multiplier at Ascendle, for those of you that saw it in the title, which is this idea of starting and then cycling while you roll out the change. You can really expect to see kind of built-in support within your team, especially as you start staggering folks in. And then it's a really sustainable approach, just like you get to your ROI faster. If you ship something early, rather than wait till everything is ready, you start seeing productivity faster rather than waiting till everybody is trained. You get like really effective team. And then that kind of expands out versus like doing the big bang training. And then also the support that you get from team members, it's higher quality. It's sort of like this train the trainer model that just naturally upskills folks that, you know, you learn by teaching. So as you continually become that teacher, it really is stickier, and the support is just more inherently built in. And then last but never least in my book, you see increased morale. People really benefit from being able to maintain productivity through major change. It's really frustrating for folks when things come to a grinding halt. So being able to avoid that is, I think, one of the key results that is a big benefit of following this model. And that's it.
Okay, we have 2 questions in Q&A, but if you have others, please feel free to drop them in. The first one is from Jim Mikowski. He said, how do you approach efforts where the team insists a large chunk of work cannot be broken down vertically or iteratively? Some examples might be build an environment or migrate a huge amount of interdependent data and verify before anything else can be done. So Tom, I'm not sure if you want to take this one, but I do want to share Dave Sidaro, our CEO, he always tells us he's never met a story he couldn't slice. And
neither has Tom.
Yes, yeah. I haven't heard Tom say it. So Tom, please tell us what you have to share.
Sure. So this is actually a question we get quite a lot. I guess my answer to your team, Jim, I would challenge them really to think more about how to split that work. You know, splitting work vertically into these vertical iterative slices really is an art. And sometimes it requires you to really kind of think 90 degrees way out of the box of how you would normally think about doing something. You would think that this is totally not the way to do it, but it actually, it works. So yeah, like Lori said, you know, that's kind of one of our challenges. Dave's really excellent, and I'm trying to do the best I can, but thinking of some way to do it, there is a way to split work vertically and iteratively. We definitely have some strategies that we have developed over time to do that. And I'd be happy to follow up with you and kind of go over some ideas. If we can get into a little bit more details, and I'd be happy to try to come up with some ideas of how to help that out if you have some things. But yeah, I would really comes down to, I would challenge the team, kind of think outside of the box. And I can give you some ideas to think about, maybe to let them, and maybe it'll expand the way that they're thinking about how to split the work.
Just want to add one thing, Tom, to that, Jim. The suspend disbelief is one of those helpful things as well. You're just like, can you just trust me to do this one tiny sliver? So we worked on a project where the one story was literally to just display someone's name. They're moving data and wanting to get it to pull out, and that was the story. And it feels so meaningless in the moment, but it actually was our proof of concept. Like if we can get just someone's name to show up, then we can do a lot of work with the rest of the data. So sometimes that little sliver, you're in it and you're like, this is not why this doesn't feel like worthy of a story. It doesn't feel like it's enough value, but it actually adds a tremendous amount of value. And so as a leader, you can really help the team kind of go through that paradigm shift of just thinking about what is enough to be considered done. Okay, we have 2 more questions. Suzanne, I think you're going to take the next one.
Sure.
Cool, great. What do you offer orgs for guidance around existing roles such as project manager and business analyst, where they fit in the transition to Scrum?
Yeah, so I'm gonna answer this in 2 parts, I think. So first, I just want to make a key statement here. Your role within a Scrum team does not have to match your title within an organization. In fact, it doesn't always. So that's kind of an important takeaway, and something that folks struggle with when we go in for agile transformations and they hold these titles. We're teaching new roles within Scrum teams. That aside, just my caveat that I wanted to make, the way we've seen this a lot. I don't know that we've ever gone into an org, or maybe we have, but not me. And their roles match exactly what we were showing before in terms of a team. Certainly not titles, but they're not always sort of lined up with how we would define the roles and responsibilities of Scrum Master, PO, and development team. So one of the things that we've done is kind of a current state analysis, and then a gap analysis for the roles and responsibilities of the folks that exist today in their org, figure out any gaps that might exist, and then kind of help guide the organization into, sometimes we even help with like who is the better fit for which role in their Scrum team or Scrum teams. Another tool we use for that is a RACI matrix, my favorite. Folks on the line that are Ascendle are laughing right now. I love a good RACI, but it's a good tool for figuring out, kind of breaking down what each role is responsible for, and then kind of comparing that to who, who needs to do what within, the roles within Scrum are quite simple. So usually what we're doing is simplifying what exists within the organization and approaching it through the hats that folks will wear. Again, not the titles that they carry.
Okay, great. And the last question I'm going to answer is, does this pilot team suffer from repeating the storming process over and over as you introduce new team members over time? So I actually just came off of a year-long engagement where we were doing this repeatedly, every few sprints, and it actually was incredibly fun. With our core team was they were formed and stormed and totally normed, and we were performing really well. It was a challenge that kind of broke up the monotony of what we were doing to bring in someone new. And every time we brought someone in, they had a different skill set. So we had someone that came in with zero experience with the product that we were building, and they were new to the organization as a whole. So that was really interesting because he actually helped us figure out a lot of issues with the system that we didn't even know about, because we had so many seasoned people on the team previously. And I think it depends on the core team, your pilot team, like how well they are working together and how much they enjoy helping others. If the expectation is set at the beginning, like you're going to be leading people through this, it actually makes it a bit of fun to go through, like, okay, Tom's going to join our team next sprint. What challenges are going to come up? How can we help him? And the spirit was then incredibly helpful, and everyone would cheer each other on. Our retrospectives were really fun. It was just like, Tom jumped on the team and he did X, Y, and Z things and totally blew us out of the water. And then we had extreme ownership. So if something got messed up or we dropped the ball and like helping someone, everyone owned that. And it was a collective effort to make sure everyone was back on track in the next sprint. So I don't think that there's suffering that happens. I will say that at one point we were trying to turn people in a little too fast. So we were trying to turn people in like we wanted to do it every 1 to 2 sprints, and that was quite exhausting because we were trying to do a lot of the onboarding work like every single sprint, and that can be time consuming for your support staff, so your Scrum Master, your product owner. That can be a lot of work, and then someone on your development team is always going to end up supporting those people as well. So that's one thing to consider, like the speed at which you're going to bring people in. There could be a cost, which then looks like the team's going to be fine, but you're not going to get as much work done, and that can be disappointing when you're like, oh, we were crushing 30 points a sprint and now we're only getting 15. But you have to weigh that out with what you're doing to help the rest of the org.